Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 6th C4 meeting. I'm Paul Savas, one of the co-chairs. I'll restate it. Mayor Hodson, one of the other co-chairs, will not be with us this evening due to a work emergency. And first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God,
liberty,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right. Thank you. Next up is the approval of the December 2nd, 2021 C4 minutes. Is there any amendments, changes, or a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Thank you, Paul.
Second.
Who made the second?
Mayor Kaiser,
Mayor
second.
Kaiser, okay. So Paul Gornick with Oak Lodge Water Services made the motion to approve the minutes. It was seconded by Mayor Kaiser. Any other discussion? Seeing none. Everyone, is there anyone opposed to the minutes? If so, raise your hands. The minutes are approved. Thank you. Pulling up again the agenda here. You know, it's easier to chair a meeting in person.
I'm happy to support Commissioner Savas. Our first order of business here is the just a meet and greet with Gail Greenman, who's here from the West Side Economic Alliance. And she's new to the role, and we do a lot of work from various jurisdictions here at the county. And so wanted to give her a chance to come and introduce ourselves to our great team here, which represents basically everybody, every elected jurisdiction almost here at Clackamas County. And so Gail, and Commissioner Savas, you both have the floor.
Yeah, Gail, go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you.
And welcome.
Thank you. So I got to meet Trent last month. As Trent said, I'm the new ED for the West Side Economic Alliance, and I try to pop into the Clackamas County coordinating committees and Washington County coordinating committees. I'm a proud Clackamas County resident. Born and raised in DC, worked in DC started my career there for many, many years, lobbied my husband, which is how I met. He was raised in Oregon City. We moved to Molalla when I first moved to Oregon. We're there for several years and now live in West Linn. So proud Clackamas County residents, and thank you for having me. I know some of you. I know a lot of your names, and so really I'm just reaching out to all West Side Economic Alliance members. It's my kind of 6-month plan to meet with each and every member, and Clackamas County is certainly a very valued and treasured member of ours. For those of you who don't know exactly what WEA is, we are a public-private economic alliance. So we have public members, which consist of obviously Clackamas County, Washington County, Metro as a member. We also have many, many cities, school districts, special service districts, et cetera. We also have a business side of our membership, so private industry. And then we have affiliate members. Those are primarily composed of nonprofits who have a vested interest in WEA for a variety of reasons. We operate under the governance of our bylaws and our board of directors, and I'll show you who those folks are in a little bit. We monitor primarily local, regional, and state issues. We don't entirely leave federal issues out. My 25-year career has, up until my ED position at WEA, has been in federal policy. 17 years of that was spent in the public education K-12 realm, and 15 years of that was spent in natural resources, specific to Oregon, but solely focused on the federal aspect as it relates to natural resources. So I say that because we do dip our toe into federal policy issues. Most recently, a good example would be IIJA. We do have a committee structure, and we're going to actually expand that committee structure, and we provide networking opportunities. So what makes us a little unique is that public-private membership and venture and our collaboration. The networking opportunities are macro. They've obviously looked, I know somebody mentioned March 2020, they've looked a little different since March of 2020 for obvious reasons. And so we have been fully virtual with the exception of our golf tournament. But we also have micro networking opportunities. Hey, Gail, I really need to talk to somebody, or who's the best person to talk to in X city, or somebody in the public sphere saying, hey, I really want to learn more about this issue. Can you connect me with somebody in the industry? And then, of course, we provide education and information. So, our vision and our mission statements really center around all of those topics. So our executive committee is made up of 8 members, and our larger board is a total of 30, and they represent all facets of industry and all different types of the public sector. And the primary local, regional, and state issues that we really focus on are housing, infrastructure, land use, transportation, UGB expansion, and workforce development. I expect education and tax to be added to that list, and within our committee structure. So right now our committee structure is our government relations committee and our land use. We have a land use and housing committee as well as a transportation committee. And I do expect education and tax to be new committees this year as we kind of get 2022 underway. I mentioned kind of our networking. We are known for our breakfast forums. Again, those have been fully virtual since March of 2020. We were so hoping and had planned to have an in-person in February of this year. I think for obvious reasons that will be delayed at this point. We will still have one. It will just not be in person. So our last 4, I started in my position on September 8th of 2021. So the 4 forums that we've had in September, October, November, and December were we hosted Congresswoman Bonamici, Congressman Schrader, State Economist Josh Lehner, and most recently in December, we hosted Representative McLean from the Washington County area, Senator Cleveland from the Vancouver area, and Administrator Greg Johnson on the I-5 bridge. We are hosting in 2 weeks, January 19th, our legislative reception, which of course you all are welcome to. We also intend this year, again, it was supposed to be February, it will be delayed, to kind of have a resurgence of our business before breakfast. And those are free events to members and non-members, and really just an ability to get a tour and learn a little bit more of all different types of businesses on the West Side. So really excited for when those can actually start. We have 2 ready to go in the hopper. The businesses are ready as soon as we are ready, and it will just kind of time will tell. So that's just a little bit about the West Side Economic Alliance. Again, Clackamas County is a very valued member. I just wanted to really, more than anything, put a face with a name. I'm starting to go around to the various cities and do the same thing. And again, would love when the time is right to meet everybody in person, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And most importantly, really wanted to thank you guys for your public service. It's so very important as a public policy kind of professional. It's our process and our government is very near and dear to my heart and always has been. So I just really wanted to extend my thanks and thank you for the time. And I know you have a busy agenda, so I will stick around to answer any questions and then watch the rest of the meeting as the other spectators.
Yeah, thank you, Gail. I have enjoyed attending from time to time some of your, prior to COVID, some of your meetings. It is a great opportunity to network. And those were recurring Wednesdays or Thursday mornings. I forgot which.
Typically, my understanding is typically they are Thursday mornings. Wednesday mornings, we have a whole host of board meetings and kind of committee meetings. That has somewhat fluctuated, as you might imagine, when we're dealing with especially members of Congress. It tends to be more on like the Mondays or Fridays for obvious reasons, trying to avoid votes. But typically it's Thursday. That is not a hard and fast rule, though.
Okay. And if someone wants to get on your email list, I am, so I get your notifications. How can they get on your list?
So I can put, I don't know if I have the ability, I know this is a webinar, I can certainly put my, yes, the chat. I can put my information in the chat, my email and my cell phone. I'm available at any time, and I can get you on that list. You can also go to westsidealliance.org. So skip the economic part, just westsidealliance.org, and contact anybody in the office from there. But if you contact me directly via email, throw me a text, give me a call, I can make it happen.
Okay, great. Is there any questions for Gail? Okay, thank you so much, Gail. Appreciate it. And I look forward to meeting you in person someday.
Thank you. You all the same. Hi, Jules. Mayor Walters, sorry. And good seeing you. Look forward to seeing those of you I know and meeting those of you who I have not had the chance to meet. I'll take myself off video and audio, but I'll pop that information in the chat.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, so next up on the agenda, we're right on time. The transit discussion, continuation from the C4 retreat. Trent, you want to take that away?
Yes, thank you. And I'm bringing over Karen Burig, who is one of our senior transportation planners here at the county. And she has a much more robust title than that because she's so awesome and does a lot of great work here with not just the county, but all of our cities. We're bringing back to you, the C4 group, some of the conversation that began back in October at the C4 retreat. I think that's a really important point to start with because there was a lot of, spaghetti on the wall, brainstorming, prioritization discussions, very somewhat entry level. Where is this group at on the priorities and interest of how they want to see transit evolve in Clackamas County? And it's been very busy since that C4 retreat, even though we've only had 2 C4 meetings. One was all about housing. The other one was all about 205. And even though the retreat was very focused on transit, this was actually just the next time that we could bring it back to you as a group. And so it's been a few months, but it's been at the front of our radar at y'all's request and at y'all's urging. So here we are back again at the next available opportunity to talk about it. And before you today is just number one, a quick update about some of the work that ODOT's been doing along 205 as they've been getting ready to figure out, the impacts of the toll program that they've been putting together, which they spoke with y'all about back in December. Some of that work too is through a variety of committees that they have, including the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee and another committee that's the Multi-Modal Work Group. So that includes transit. And 2 things that we're going to talk about today is number one, a quick update on a request that ODOT had to understand better some of the transit priorities along the 205 corridor as they're trying to prepare the early stages of that work to be able to build some sort of conversation or recommendation at the elected level. So it's very early, but we wanted to update y'all that they're having that conversation, and we do have sort of some time to talk about that, and I'll let Karen kind of run with this after my introduction. The next part of it is that continuation of what started at the C4 retreat. That one question is just about the 205 corridor, but what does this group want to do as a larger group when it comes to transit in Clackamas County? How do you want to see those services level up? Is there infrastructure that needs to level up? Are there opportunities to coordinate on that? Does this group want to have some unified policies around transit and the vision of transit here within Clackamas County? So it's kind of a lofty, big topic with not very many things to necessarily grapple onto today, but the conversation that you have will help us, help Karen, help Teresa and Dwight, and all of our other transit providers be able to keep working with you and with each other on moving some policies forward and projects forward based on what comes out of this discussion tonight. And with that, I'll give it to Karen, again, who I can't speak enough good words about because she's just so awesome. And I think y'all all worked with her enough to know that too.
Well, Trent, thank you very much for that very extensive and detailed introduction. I really, really appreciate it. And good evening, all C4 members. So as Trent said, we're going to break this presentation into 2 parts. So I'm going to just show 1 or 2 slides, and then I'll bring us all back together so we can have a conversation, and then I'll have a couple other slides as well. And then I will also kind of reiterate what Trent said. There's also Dwight Brashear in the room with SMART, and Teresa Christofferson with Clackamas County, so they may jump in where they find appropriate, just to make sure that I'm on track, because they are all very deeply engaged in many of these things as well. So here we go. Right, so this is our ability to kind of keep this conversation going. One of the things that we really heard at the C4 meeting was just it was an interest in making sure that we continue to be involved in transit and allow the C4 members to have some transit coordination. Oops, hold on. Oops, here we go. All right, this is the way we go. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about really are the transit needs within the I-205 tolling project area. And so as Trent mentioned, ODOT staff for the tolling project has been reaching out, and they really have a couple of different venues that they've been working with staff on a variety of different issues. And one particular venue that they've been working with staff is on a multimodal committee where they're getting input. And currently they're developing a transit and multimodal strategy. It's really in a draft form, but the purpose of that strategy is first of all to identify current needs and propose solutions for transit and multimodal transportation options. It will be there to inform ODOT's commitments with regards to delivering improvements through mitigation for these issues, and it also will be a communication tool. And so they've really been working with staff to get input and create a draft of this project. So the strategy is really only in draft form right now. Here we go. So with that, the ODOT staff has also been meeting specifically with the small Clackamas County transit providers to make sure that they are hearing and connecting and understanding what type of transit needs are out there. And so what we have here really is a list that has been developed and brainstormed with the different transit providers in the area. What we've done is we've kind of grouped it into categories to be able to give people an idea of the types of improvements that are needed, at least from the view of the small transit providers. They fall into the categories of transit centers and park and rides. So the need to upgrade the transit center in Oregon City, be able to add to transit center to be able to meet the needs of the riders of the adjoining communities who use that transit center. Also thinking about the importance of improved park and ride locations along that I-205 corridor. So that's something that's very central. The second point that really has been made is the need for service and expanded and more frequent service along I-205 to be able to think about that express service along I-205 using bus on shoulder. And then the other type of service, which we've talked about quite a bit, is that local last mile shuttle that moves people around cities and can connect to those larger transit providers. So something that the transit providers think very closely about is in order to use that or produce that service, they need more vehicles. So they've definitely communicated that there'll be a need for additional vehicles, just as there is with additional service. And then finally, the category of infrastructure. So basically transit facility upgrades to accommodate these vehicles. And then potentially there might even be need to support the Canby ferry service. And that's, I think, out there and being talked about just as one of the many multi-modes that might be impacted by the full I-205 corridor. And so with that, that's been the kind of a summary of what has been talked about to date. And the question that we're hoping to have some discussion about is, are there additional transit priorities within this corridor that should be considered? And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second because it's easier to talk when we can see everyone. I guess I would also invite Dwight or Teresa if you have additional information you want to add. I think when I was talking with Christina before the meeting, she had mentioned that there had been actually a meeting recently with transit providers and ODOT to kind of confirm that this was sort of the grouping of projects. So with that.
Anyone want to jump in?
Well, I will add that Karen's absolutely right. We, the small providers, have had, I want to say, at least 4 or 5 meetings with ODOT. The most recent meeting was yesterday. They kind of laid out kind of an initial plan for transit-related services along that corridor. Asked for our input. As a matter of fact, what they presented was as a result of a great deal of input from the small providers. I think the biggest concern that we stressed was that in the past, we have not seen this level of engagement from any of the types of projects, especially major projects, and the toll project qualifies. And so we are cautiously optimistic that they will continue to engage us, because I think they realize that we are flexible, we are nimble, and that if they are serious about equity in that corridor and getting things done and done quickly, and of course done right, that it is going to take all of us working together. And the small providers, you know, we're obviously working very hard to bring improvements to Clackamas County, and we're proud of that, and we're looking forward to working with ODOT. But we'll keep an eye on it and see if they continue to engage us on this. So Teresa, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
No, I agree with you, Dwight. I think it's been a very pleasant development to have this level of engagement with ODOT early on in this project. You know, I would add that the list that's been developed at this point really is at the level of a wish list. You know, there are definitely some additional work that would need to be done at the local level to make sure that we're capturing all elements of local interest and local buy-in prior to moving forward with any of these projects. But I do think that it's a good starting place and a good starting place for discussion about what the future could hold as far as transit improvements that can help mitigate some of the impacts of this project. So things are definitely moving in the right direction. But just so you all aware that at this point, there are not firm plans in place necessarily for any of these things, but we're working off of a wish list of the types of projects and the types of activities that we think could help mitigate some of the impacts.
Great. Okay, thank you. Mayor Buck, you're up next.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's just a couple kind of questions. When we're talking about the corridor, the area, you know, that they're considering, what area is that? It's, you know, as it relates to mitigation from the tolling project. I mean, we're talking about, you know, areas hugging I-205, or are we thinking of more expansive area? Did ODOT kind of articulate that in their discussions?
So I'll jump in with my understanding is, and I don't have a map that's easily available, but we are typically looking at kind of from the I-205 and its intersection with Highway 213 on the northern end of the corridor down to at the intersection of with I-5. And then kind of the greater area around that does include down to Wilsonville and into Canby. So if you're kind of seeing that, and then some area that goes up a little bit into, I would say not quite Milwaukee, and then kind of over into West Lynn, I think is kind of the broader sort of circle, and then over to Tualatin. So it's not directly on the corridor, but they are looking somewhat off the corridor as well, but to those communities that are in essence kind of adjacent to I-205.
Okay, thank you for that. And then what, one thing I've been wondering is kind of what the actual plan is. There's language, talked about in ODOT's, RTP amendment application around transit service and whatnot. But and as you've explained, this is kind of at the beginning stages and whatnot. But are we clear on what the process is going forward, engaging with these communities in Clackamas County, and how we're going to get from this theoretical discussion to actual projects and money on the ground?
So the only thing I'll speak to right now that I would say I can speak clearly about is that they are working on what they're calling a transit and multimodal transportation strategy. So that's specifically, so that strategy is specifically for the transit and multimodal needs, right? There's a whole suite of other issues associated with the tolling, but right now what we're talking about is the transit and multimodal needs. And so they're having these conversations, they're doing the different analysis. And so right now, like in December, they had just a very initial draft available that they're working with the transit providers on to be able to make sure that they have the whole scope of the needs.
Okay, so it's like kind of just a needs analysis, and there's really no further connection to future work yet. That's something we'd have to stay on top of.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think what we would understand, this is the other thing that I understand, is that I know that the multimodal subcommittee, which is a staff attends that, will be talking in more detail about this report kind of in January, probably getting another draft of that, and then that being able to provide input into the process as it moves forward.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, Councilor Heisey.
Thank you, and thanks, Karen. I'm glad to hear that this is all moving forward. I think this is probably embedded in some of these different subsections, but I just wanted to make explicit an interest in making sure that when small transit providers are looking at adding vehicles to their fleet, that they are adopting the cleanest possible options, and working to ensure that we're meeting climate goals in the work that is undertaken. We can't just switch to. We want everyone to switch to transit, but we also want it to be clean transit, because that has health impacts for the communities that those are going through, and carbon emissions and all that jazz. So I wanted to call that out, along with integrating with the latest Intismo technologies to improve efficiencies of the system, and also thinking about the integration between those active transportation options, particularly if you're in the final mile, and I think that's all built in, because this is, they're looking at transit and multimodal at the same time. I just have to say it out loud to know that it's been heard. And then I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how TriMet is involved in these conversations as well, because this area obviously is also served by TriMet, and I think the focus on small transit providers is great, but I would love to hear more about that too, because particularly in Milwaukee, we could use some small transit, but we are heavily serviced by TriMet, and we appreciate that, and just want to make sure that all of this ends up working together.
So I would say that TriMet is also involved in conversations with ODOT regarding this corridor, and they participate in the multimodal transit committee meetings, and they have also been kind of connected to staff directly. So part of the solutions in this corridor involve service by TriMet, service by SMART, service by the small last mile shuttles, it's many different layers.
Okay, next up is Ed Grocky.
As a retired businessman, I'm somewhat concerned, and I guess I'll be honest with you, Karen. I base this on a background of more than 20 years of frustrating dealings with ODOT. ODOT is going to meet with our CPO in March, and I'm sure they're going to hear another list of needs, and our needs mainly have to do with TriMet because we're further up in the corridor. But we are going to will definitely be affected by the work on 205. And what I'm concerned about is that I know we're early in the process, and there will be, I'm sure, a formal listing of transit needs identified with ODOT, but there's a difference between adding a vehicle and paying for the cost of operating that vehicle. And TriMet in the past many times has agreed that there is a need in a particular area, but it will be years before they can meet that need because of the financial constraints under which they operate. And I'm sure the small transit providers are dealing with the same problem. My question is, will ODOT do more than simply say, we have identified the needs, now we're going to go ahead with the project, and in effect say we have met our responsibilities to the community, but we're no better off than we are right now?
So I think you bring up excellent questions. I totally agree with many of those things that you have just said. But I would say that through these conversations, ODOT is talking about what constraints they may have on the tolling money that is collected and how it can or cannot be used. But it's my understanding they're also looking into what type of options may be out there with regards to flexibility in funding for transit solutions, and those including operations. They don't have a solid answer like, we know we can do this, but it is something that's on the table that's being talked about.
Well, I would feel a lot better if their comment were something like, we will not institute tolling on I-205 until certain transit needs are met. And until we have that commitment from ODOT, I'm very skeptical.
I would also say that the work that the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee is doing is putting together some foundational statements, and providing for transportation options is embedded within those foundational statements. They really are aligned very closely with what you're saying.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. Next up is Councilor Sherman. You're on mute, Councilor.
Hey, I am an old man. Thank you, as always, Karen. It's good to see you. Good to go through the information again. You know, one of the things as we kind of talk through this, could you maybe just elaborate a little bit, or just help me understand, as I think about expanding, say, transit along the corridor, in my mind, that's kind of a finite area. And when people travel, they don't just stay in a corridor, they're using it to get somewhere. So it's, you know, it's just like part of the overall trip. So in my mind, when I think through this, if we're going to provide transit that's going to satisfy this corridor, you also have to think about the entire, literally like the whole system has to be improved to satisfy that. And so, you know, it's like the vein, you know, the arteries and the capillaries, all the capillaries have to work. And so can you kind of help me understand, am I just thinking too broadly? And, because when I go to the airport from Happy Valley, I've got 2 train transfers. Each one is an extra 15, 20 minutes. Just trying to get to that location becomes a really long process. And I guess maybe a secondary comment, in today's environment, it's impossible. TriMet is woefully understaffed for drivers and they can't hire people now. So how do we expand this stuff to make that work? Those are my 2 questions today. Thank you.
So everyone has these really good and hard questions. And I'll probably on this one, I might pull in Dwight and Teresa with some of their thoughts. But I guess one of the things that I would say is, even in this initial list, it sort of reflects what you're talking about in the sense of, getting places as a network. And so investments will need to be made in the transit systems related to Canby. Investments will need to be made in the transit center in Oregon City that really serves as a hub for many of these areas. Investments will need to be made in the service that SMART would be providing, connecting Wilsonville and Clackamas Town Center. And then investments will also need to be made in the last mile connections that Clackamas County has been helping to facilitate, that's connecting Tualatin there to kind of the broader area. So in essence, really looking at that, but even growing from that, if you think about that, those connections within TriMet that are, are the 33 that might provide service up on McLaughlin, or even the 35 providing service up to Lake Oswego. So all of those different things need to be thought about during this process. So I think this list that has been created by the small transit providers, as well as the information that's being provided by TriMet, is really trying to kind of set that foundation is there. And I feel like there was a second part of your question.
There was a second part is about hiring drivers, but that's not really an answer that I'm going to require you. If you've got a magical fix for that, that'd be awesome. No. And I think, I would echo Mr. Grocky. It's my concern is always that, we start with a process, we kind of look at figuring out certain ways of dealing with it, but, we really kind of look to see, is it going to be broken before we actually fix it? In a system like this, we really can't afford to make it be broken initially before we try to fix it. So that's all. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Next up, we have Councilor Lewis.
Thank you so much. I think this is really important and very good work. And I think that there's 2 ways to think about it. One is in the way that it's been presented tonight of ODOT has this process that is including this work group, and how do we bring up our issues, not only about modality split, but within the modality service split between transit provided by TriMet and transit provided by the smaller agencies. And I think that's both about agency, but it's also about where they are in the map of the study area. But the second way to think about this is also in light of where we are in the MTIP and RTP process. And I would love to see pieces of this work end up on a project list that we could include as part of RTP requirements if it is going to move forward with an RTP amendment in the next couple of months. I think that the base level of a conceptual park and ride system, we could put that as a bullet point, but wouldn't it be great to take some of this and have some actual detail fleshed out to show ODOT that we're pretty serious and that we have real needs that we can point to right now. Sorry if I just went in a totally different, almost self-serving way, because that's what's the decision at the metro level is coming up. But I think that strategically it would behoove us to elevate it now and not just in the ODOT process.
Great. Counselor, do you want to just, is there anything we want to add as far as the outcome of where JPAC we landed and what it's looking like for January's JPAC meeting? Anything you want to add that might relate to the MTIP, RTIP amendment?
Yeah, sorry, I just dove right in without helping lay the foundation of where we are. So we've obviously had a couple of presentations from the ODOT team leading up to what they were hoping to be a January vote We would be at JPAC for both the RTP amendment and the MTIP. So those are two different actions. One is to allow the funding to move. The other is to basically put the land use and transportation plan vision into our document. At Commissioner Savis's request, we will still be having the discussion in January. It is not being noticed for a vote because I believe that there's consensus that we have to get some amendments ready because as it is currently presented, the cake's not cooked. Similarly, the RTP amendment, because it does touch land use, needs to go to MPAC, and Mayor Buck, I think, has done some of the same kind of looking around the room, that it's not ready for a vote in January yet, but it will be noticed for a conversation and not a vote in January. It's looking like timelines. We need to be thinking that February or March could be votes, but we've got 1 or 2 months to develop amendments if we'd like. I had staff reach out to me today to say, is it possible that you're gonna be ready in February? I was like, I don't know. We've got to let the process play out and we have to have these real conversations. So there's a plan for March. I mean, we can move it up to February if we start pushing it back. I think it's only if we're doing our due diligence and good work that we'll be able to continue to have the process move forward.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor, for that. The only thing I will add to that, in this meeting, the timing is actually perfect. So we couldn't really have a better opportunity to have this discussion here tonight. And that is, it hasn't really been clear from ODOT yet as to what funds might be available or revenue sharing or whatever that might look at to actually fund these projects. So it's nice to that we can have the opportunity, and we're being solicited, our input's being solicited here as to what that might look like. But it would certainly not be helpful for us to get some kind of scale, and our providers as well, as the capital side as well as the operational side, which really is important to make sure if you build something, you got the funds to operate it. So we hope to have some clarity on that sometime soon. And I don't see anyone from TriMet here tonight, but I want to make sure that if they have something to add, don't be shy and let Trent know, and we'll make sure you're recognized.
They are not here, unfortunately. And I wouldn't normally do this, and I was going to add this to our updates, but the conversation is pertinent. Another reason for some of that delay at JPAC and IMPAC is because of the good work that this group did in December to send that letter to the OTC to remind them that, hey, there are these new federal dollars, and can that change the paradigm of how you fund this project? Does it have to be all tolling, or is there opportunities here? And the OTC is going to meet on January 20, which happened to be the same day as JPAC. And so JPAC at their December meeting said, hey, you know what? We also agree with that. Does this funding change how that conversation happens? And it made a lot of sense that if the OTC is going to have that conversation, if C4 and JPAC are asking the OTC to have that conversation, should they have that conversation first before a decision is made? So I really want to encourage y'all. That snowball started rolling because of the work y'all did with that letter. A next step here for this group, and many of you who live on the 205 corridor, is to show up at that OTC meeting and testify about the value of those dollars and the value that brings to this conversation. And if there's an opportunity there, you as elected officials, can influence or at least show up and voice that concern for your different jurisdictions. And so we're going to work with you guys at the staff level and through Commissioner Savis at the elected level about preparing for some of those things. So if you're interested in showing up to the OTC meeting and testifying, feel welcome to reach out through Commissioner Savis or through me. We'll help you along the way with some of that stuff through some of the work you've already laid groundwork for. So I was going to do this at the end, but because this came up, I'm sorry to interject, but it's very important, I think, that this opportunity is here in January to have that conversation with the OTC. It's coming up right now on January 20.
Yeah. Thank you, Trent, for saying that, and also kudos to Trent and all the staff who helped with that letter, because it was nice to have that letter all primed up, and we went with it, and it worked out very well. So kudos to everyone who was part of that. Mayor Fitzgerald, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. Really appreciate all the comments today. And I wanted to bring up one other one that I think we have said at this meeting or maybe C4 subcommittee, and that is how, as we think about all these great additions to our transit system and park and ride, we talked about covered shelters, last mile, bus on shoulder. A lot of us in this room have tried those things and ride transit, but there's still such a huge majority of the population that aren't even close to ever trying transit. And I wonder if, as we talk about the funding that is needed to build all these things, if there is a placeholder or something in these materials that is saving some money for communications and marketing, and that would go to all the small, probably all these providers, so that we can, within our communities and networks, begin to do some things to convert people to transit.
That's a good comment.
You
Next up.
can't get them all, but you can get some.
Did you have anything else to add, Mayor?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your input. Mr. Cook.
Yeah, first I want to thank everybody for all the hard work they've done so far on this, and I know there's a ton more to go. I guess maybe for Karen is that the process for the rural areas, and not just Stafford, but our transit out here is pretty much nil. And I know we're going to be almost the drive-through of this transit thing. How do we get into that process where we talk to maybe Dwight about, okay, what do you guys have planned? Is it just going to be SMART that's going to be coming through this area? And then some of the discussions we've had is where the park and rides are going to be. And looking at this hotspot at Stafford and I-205, I mean, it's just like, is that going to blow up and be an area that we need to have contact with early to see how we're going to incorporate those things in? So I guess, a simple thing is the small transit people, how many of those are going to be coming through the, Borland and up through Wilsonville, and that's going to spill over later on down to 43 going through Lake Oswego and West Lynn also, I would assume.
So for your question, I am going to, since Dwight is here, and Teresa is, maybe I could ask both of them to talk a little bit about the best way for the rural areas to connect with both of you as these different services emerge.
All right. Well, the small providers, we meet every week, every Wednesday, and we are in the process, as a matter of fact, of reconvening an advisory committee that is required through the STIF process. And so there would be an ideal opportunity to not only participate on the advisory committee, but also show up and make comments as we start to work through plans for 2024, 2025, I think is what we're working on right now. But I can tell you, working with ODOT on this tolling project, we are, and I say we, the small providers are going to insist that they fund transit, not only SMART, but Canby and Malala and, Sandy, all of the other small transit providers in Clackamas County. Again, as I said, this doesn't work just by SMART alone. It's going to take all of us. And so we're going to have to kind of build up all of the transit agencies. And so specifically as it relates to Borland and Stafford, initially in our plan being SMART and the small providers plan, there will be two agencies, SMART and Ride Connection, that will be servicing that particular area. And, it's our hope that through the success of that program, we can grow and bring some of the other providers, where it's needed into the rural areas. Because I think Sandy, Canby, Malala are your primary, and then of course Clackamas County runs service too. They're your primary operators in the rural area. But SMART obviously is a team player, and we're willing to do what we can to support transit in the region and through that I-205 corridor.
I'll send you an email to get on your list there.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Great. Well, thank you, Dwight. I want to kind of build on what Mayor Fitzgerald just touched on, at least one of the things she touched on about our last discussion with the park and ride, for example, or transit centers or improving transit centers. And also to Councilor Sherman's point about, it's not just along the corridor, but, people are going through the corridor. We have, as a reminder, from the Clackamas Town Center to I-5, that's about 14-mile stretch of I-205 there. No continuous transit service that goes through there today. But it happens that we have a underutilized parking structure there at the end of the green line. And for example, if Councilor Sherman wanted to take a trip to Bridgeport Mall or take a trip to downtown Wilsonville, or wherever he could go, if there was an opportunity for him to drive from Happy Valley to the parking structure, park his car, and then catch a ride down the bus on shoulder project or some means of transit along that corridor, it would be a lot easier if people knew that they had that service before they get down the 205 corridor. And of course, I think we talked, and I think some of us envisioned, what if there were enhanced parking facilities in transit centers, whether it's in Oregon City downtown, or it's at maybe not at every off-ramp, but at every destination, or like Willamette, or perhaps Stafford Moreland, or somewhere in there. If there were opportunities for people to catch transit, there are nice facilities there in Wilsonville. Dwight's got a great hub there, and you can connect to other connections, whether you want to go north or south along the I-5 corridor, or somewhat westerly by taking west. So there are a lot of options. There is destinations. I think we need to consider that, or be recognized that there are destinations. But I'm kind of enamored personally, just to get my input there tonight, and I'll stop talking here in a minute, but I really think that the transit centers, as I watched the Orange Line first business day of the Orange Line, that parking structure filled up by 7:30 in the morning. The very first day, it was packed and full and overflowing. So, it tells me that because we have a lot of our citizens are in this car-centric situation where there's no shuttle, there's no easy way to access the main corridor. If we don't have enhanced shuttle service or local jitneys or whatever, a shuttle, something of that matter, local circulators, how do people actually get access to that? And I think people are forced to drive to the transit corridor. And if they have the ability to park their car, I think they're more likely to find that convenience and entice people. And then to the other point about Mayor Fitzgerald made is how we market that. I think if we have those connections to some key destinations, I think we can inform people that there is a viable way of using the system. That's my 2 cents, and I'll switch over to Mayor Walters.
Thank you. Just quickly, I was a little concerned about the conversation or the discussion earlier about Lake Oswego not being considered part of the corridor. Since Stafford Road is a direct connection to downtown Lake Oswego and Highway 43. Highway 43 in the evening stacks up all the way to past the city limit of Westland and Lake Oswego, past former Merrillhurst College. And so I just really think it's important that we're taking in the effect on that town that we have now, let alone what it's going to be like once tolling is implemented. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Mayor. I'm going to ask Trent or Karen, and I don't want to change the subject. I'm not trying to change the subject, but I'm just kind of wondering, part of this offering transit will certainly take a lot of load and pressure off the I-5 or the I-205 corridor. People use transit, we have it there. But I'm wondering how, how that affects at all any diversion, which is one of our bigger concerns. That's not necessarily a conversation for tonight. I'm asking the question. How does that fold in?
Thank you, Commissioner. I am going to maybe encourage us to maybe transition the conversation a little bit, just given the the transit topics we have tonight. But to answer your question, yes, what we're hearing from the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee and even the Transit and Multimodal Work Group, what we're going to hear from those groups is that yes, transit is a resource to meet the needs of diversion. It's not probably the only resource and the only conversation. So there, you have a diversion subcommittee that will continue working on this and monitor it closely. You have a great transit team here tonight, and even some of the folks who aren't able to make it tonight who can keep navigating this conversation. It's going to be one tool of those needs, but it's certainly an important one, especially as you try to figure out this corridor and beyond. The travel shed, as it were, and then also, what resources this group can bring to bear to prepare for that, whether it's through mitigations that ODOT wants to do, or as we'll talk about in sort of the next segment of this discussion, any mitigation or work or infrastructure or operations that this group wants to start prioritizing, whether it's in the corridor or around the corridor or in the county in general.
Okay, thank you for that. Councilor Heisey.
Yeah, this is just a real high level quick comment that as we're thinking about this, it's so easy to get stuck on what we don't have now and how frustrating that is. And I don't have a specific here, but I think Mayor Fitzgerald keeps getting at this in different ways too, that as we're talking about this, I hope we are always thinking about 30 years out, and the future will be very different. And so just keeping that in the back of your mind as we're having these conversations about values and what we need and long-term priorities. Transportation is going to look radically different 30 years from now. What are the things we are doing now that we may regret later on, money that we spent in a way that didn't serve us in the long run, or missed opportunities, or things we can see now we really do need. I think that just shifts the focus a little if you try and keep that pulled back perspective in mind from time to time.
Thank you. Mayor Lyle Smith, I just have a question for you, and that is, do you think that better park or more available parking at the Oregon City Transit Center would potentially enhance transit use? Hate to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think so. The way that I think it could help is potentially alleviate. Well, I don't know. I don't know. And I don't know that if I have enough information about the current transit ridership to say. I don't know if most people are getting on at the community college. And so that is ideally alleviating traffic that's going down Highway 213 and going downtown, or if the transit center downtown would actually maybe send more people down 213, or maybe just collect more people on that location instead of the community college. For me, when I take transit, my general goal is to reduce the number of connections and stops and starts I have to make. So if I were to get on at the community college and I'm just going to have to get off at downtown and transfer to a different bus, then I would just rather drive downtown and park there, because it reduces a waiting and an off and on that I have to do right next door. So I don't know that I have enough information on that. I think Oregon City in general has a desire to have better parking and a parking garage downtown, period, just to support our downtown, and the transit would be a byproduct of that, would also probably benefit from that. I just don't know if there's enough information. I think my understanding of the minimum improvements that we need of the transit center downtown is it's just not big enough for the buses that are coming in and trying to park. It can't handle the bus traffic that's there, and needing, but Karen actually may know more details than I do, but I think that's my understanding.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Sorry, I didn't really answer your question.
Well, you helped. I think you helped point out, I've kind of watched the activity around the transit center off 99E in Oregon City. And, there's not, as you know, it's very difficult to park, right?
Yeah.
It's
definitely not serving as a hub, which, I think it's supposed to, and I can't tell if it's, and that's largely probably due to parking. But I would be interested in hearing from the service providers, like, where does the community college play in that role? I feel like we almost have competing transit hubs, but certainly downtown Oregon City, I think, is meant to be a hub, but yeah, it's not functioning well now. And certainly the parking and lack of parking would make a huge difference.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Karen, anything else you would like to solicit from this group?
Well, we do have the second part of the conversation. And I also know, though, that we're right at time. So Trent, help me out. So we're going to talk about the I-205 input, which we just had, but now we were going to switch a little and talk about specifically the overall transit priorities that were provided at the C4 retreat. So what do you think, Trent?
So thank you for that. I'm basically going to give our C4 membership here a couple of options. So the conversation that you would normally be starting now is just to help me and your executive committee figure out how best to unpack the agendas at C4 into 2022, which is a great conversation. One of those primary conversations, though, is this conversation about transit. And so this has already been delayed a couple of months. Both the transit conversation has been delayed in its own right because of other busy topics, which are good and timely, but also that other prioritization sheet. I think that can probably still wait another month, and we could probably just devote the February meeting to it, because I think there's plenty of things to talk about, such as how do you want to incorporate climate goals into your discussions. I don't think that's going to be a 15-minute conversation. So I would encourage you to keep going on this one as my recommendation. But if you want to shift to the other one, certainly it is your meeting. And so, but my recommendation is to go into the second phase of this transit discussion, because it's going to give your transit teams and your providers a lot more to work with in the coming couple of months to have this conversation early. That's my recommendation.
Okay, is the group okay with just altering the agenda, just going a little bit longer on this one? Okay, great. Karen?
Great. Okay, I'm going to share my screen for a second. All right, so within your packet was a summary of the transit objectives that were shared at the C4 retreat. So everyone, each C4 member had an opportunity to talk about what their primary concerns and objectives were. So what I did is I actually did a very similar thing and started to group those transit objectives. In your packet is the information by jurisdiction. And then I took that information that was in your packet and then I grouped it into these three categories. That's the category of coordination, the category of service, and then the category of infrastructure. So that very top one was the interest of staying relevant in the transit discussions. And I think really what we're talking about here today is being able to continue to do that. So there's that bundle of coordination issues that really is, about us working together. So just as a reminder, the service kind of fell into a couple of different categories. There was a lot of interest in a local last mile connections, different type of shuttle service. Several different jurisdictions talked about shuttle service. I thought it was interesting as I was reading it, in different areas of the county, there was this interest in providing for those east-west needs. There was the discussion about transit service and the rural communities, and making sure if there's transit going through those rural communities, that there should be some way to access that transit. And I think there was also, I wasn't quite sure where to put this concern that was brought up, but just those challenges that are related to topography in Clackamas County. And I think that is related to service. So the other bucket that really people brought up is the infrastructure around the transit service, right? And the fact that sidewalks are needed, the active transportation network needs to be enhanced to support those trips to transit. Again, sidewalks in the industrial area, safe sidewalks and crossings, improved access to bus lines, parking, shelters, all of that infrastructure. So that's a high level summary of like what we heard in October. So from that, changing the slide is interesting. What I thought would be helpful is to connect a little bit to funding, right? So we have these objectives. How is it that these objectives could be funded? I'm just going to provide a little bit of information about two funding sources that are currently being talked about. So one, and this is one that many of you have heard about before, it's a key one, and that's the HB 2017, Keep Moving, Oregon Keep Moving, the STIF plans, the State Transportation Improvement Fund plans. And so those funds are specifically for service enhancements and improvements. It's about improving service. It's also for planning for public transit. They're really looking at, and this helps us remind us that the priorities are to be able to provide public transit for low-income households and students, being able to make sure that there are low or no emission buses, improving connection between communities, reducing fragmentation. So a lot of the concerns and issues here in Clackamas County, there is this particular funding source for. So this here is a nice little timeline because STIF plans are done in 2-year increments. There's kind of a, I think both Dwight and Teresa would agree with me when I say it's kind of a complicated process they've got for putting together and identifying projects. And we are layered, we in Clackamas County are layered into a broader conversation with TriMet. But here in front of you is the schedule for the next STIF plan development that is being coordinated by TriMet. And so both Commissioner Savas and Dwight sit on the HB 2017 advisory committee. And so just at their last meeting, I think this aggressive schedule for next year was laid out. But I did want to let you guys know that they're going to be talking about the next 2 years of the STIF funds. And so another thing that I want to highlight here is that TriMet puts together an STIF plan for within its service area, but each of our local transit providers put together STIF plans for their particular areas, and those STIF plans are then integrated together. So this area that's kind of highlighted in red and public outreach, part of that, which is going to be happening in June, July, August timeframe, that's when a lot of these plans are going to be coming together. So what I wanted to really communicate is that one, if you're a local jurisdiction, such as Canby, Sandy, Wilsonville, Molalla, you'll be developing your own plans, but those will then be brought together for Clackamas County and integrated into this. So that's important to note. There'll be conversations going on there. And then this is a little window in to what the conversation looked like at the last round, the last STIF plan put together by TriMet. And why I put this and show this to you is to be able to, so folks have that additional detail of the type of things that are funded through this funding source and the conversations that will be had. And I really think this actually may be one of those opportunities you may want to talk about for conversation and funding related to the shuttles. So right now, the fourth line down, which says regional coordination, that's the funding bucket within the TriMet service area that pays for those last mile shuttles. And as you might notice for the within this funding cycle, that really has stayed consistent. And one of the things that we have talked about locally is if we are interested in having more shuttles funded, there needs to be a conversation about increasing the regional coordination bucket. You can also see here that there's a variety of things that are funded by the STIF funds. And this is where service expansion, additional buses, different things like that are funded. So just, and I mentioned this before, in a very similar way, these plans are put together at a very local level. So in Clackamas County, the STIF plans include both projects for what's often referred to as formula funds, funds that we anticipate coming directly to our area, but also those regional coordination projects. Wilsonville is similar. They have those regional coordination projects. Canby, Sanby, and South Clackamas, they don't necessarily have those regional coordination projects. They really are focused on those formula funds. So I'm veering a little bit away from the STIF here. This is, again, very high level, but I wanted to make sure that folks knew this was going on right now, because we just talked about service, right? And so the STIF funds potentially fund for more service, potentially fund shuttles. But how do we get those sidewalks? How do we get that infrastructure built? And so I did want folks to be aware that the Regional Flexible Funds program, which is a funding program that does fund sidewalk construction, is currently open and accepting applications. So this is a process, and again, we'll loop back through the C4 Metro subcommittee and back to C4, and you'll be engaged in this process later in the year, but right now is the time that individual jurisdictions would be submitting applications. So with that, there's two discussion questions we're kind of priming the group with. One is, are there common needs related to transit that C4 should coordinate or advocate for? So we think of that broader list that we heard about, that was talked about in October. And then are there overall transit objectives or goals that C4 might want to use to guide policy and funding discussions? So those are two things to think about, and I'm going to stop sharing and we can continue the conversation.
Thank you, Karen. One thing that came up at STIF, the last STIF discussion a little bit in the bylaw change, I think there was, maybe Portland was asking for more, basically would boil down to more frequency. I think we also made a change to talk about having more coverage. Would coverage, which is really coverage meaning bringing service into areas that don't have service. We have a lot of transit deserts. Would that be an appropriate topic or point to make here, Karen?
So I would say that STIF funds new service. And so if it's service in an area that doesn't have service right now, it would be something that would be appropriate to be funded by STIF.
Okay, great. I'll open it up for any comments, suggestions.
I guess I'd also throw it out again to Teresa or Dwight if they wanted to talk anything more. I mean, I just scratched the surface there about funding and its relationship to transit. And so I don't know if you guys have anything else you want to add, or if you want to talk about kind of this upcoming process in relationship to the STIF plans in your communities.
Well, I'll add, I will say this, just to give the group an example, the I-205 Express shuttle, I don't think we've come up with a catchy name for it yet. The Bus on Shoulder project there is being primarily funded through formula funds that SMART receives through STIF, and then large discretionary grant that was kind of a group effort, but Clackamas County took the lead on it. And so because it appealed in so many ways and helped, I think, so many people along Borland Road, Stafford Road, on through to West Lynn, and then of course, all the way to Clackamas Town Center. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the largest grants awarded to Clackamas County for this service. So the stiff dollars work, and especially if the small providers can pool their resources in this way, I think we can develop projects like this, not only along the I-205, but in some of the other, less, I always love when Commissioner Savas calls the transit deserts out. And so I think these kind of funds can certainly fund service in those transit deserts and make them less of deserts. So I just try to give the group some kind of perspective on how these things work. And so these funds are extremely important to the small providers.
Thank you, Dwight. Councilor Heisey.
Teresa, if you wanted to say anything, I don't mean to cut you off there.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the values question that Karen raised, and it seems to me like we all are pretty interested in getting the biggest bang for our buck, and how we define that may vary a little bit, but efficiencies of systems that help get people truly on transit seem like something that we would all value, and things that really actually get more people on transit, I think are really valuable. And that may not actually be more service in some places. It may be, furthering some of the work that has already happened with small transit providers and TriMet to get better timing so that people don't have long waits, so that people are more interested in taking the buses. It may be getting Wi-Fi on buses, whatever it is that it takes to get people attracted to the process of getting on the bus and using it, I think is really valuable. Because that serves all of the purposes that we're looking for, right? We're trying to get people to use transit. We're trying to get cars off the road. We're trying to make the system viable. We keep hearing from TriMet that that's necessary. And I don't say that in opposition to also working to serve the transit deserts, but I think that in addition, we really do need to not lose sight of the fact that there may be pretty simple, cost-effective things that make a huge difference.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. It reminded me of some conversations I had with some local residents when the Orange Line was about to come online. And some people said, hey, I'm really excited. This is actually going to take me to, my place of work where I work or whatnot. And some people, when the route alignment changed, had also said, I'm not going to be able to use transit any longer because it won't take me where I want to go any longer. The route changed. So what I took away from that was, convenience, right? I mean, convenience, speed, efficiencies. So people can actually get to their destination, and having a complete system or a complete trip, I think is really important. Otherwise, I think we're not likely to increase ridership unless we have more of the convenience and the access and all of that. So that's one takeaway that I think we should consider when we think about it. And unless you ride transit a lot or you've had that experience, I think we need to make sure that people's trips complete. So I think completing a system, if you will, and getting access to the system is an absolute must if we're going to bring in new people to ride. Anyone else want to jump in?
Well, the one point that I wanted to bring up, particularly as it relates to the STIF funds, is the importance of looking at that last mile service. You know, we generally have, in terms of the TriMet bus line, some of the larger bus services, we generally have great access to kind of central locations, to centralized services. But there's the reality of, particularly as we look at seniors and persons with disabilities, particularly as we look at lower income households, that there can be other issues that prevent people from being able to ride transit, from, you know, ranging from topography, just access to transit services in their local areas. So I really hope that we can try to leverage dollars on a local level to enhance that last mile access, because I think that builds transit ridership in the big picture over the long run. And I do want to also comment, I agree with the amenities. I know that that's been something that we've been working toward, ranging from electronic fare, ranging from, you know, different kinds of systems like that, that I think just continue to make transit more and more user friendly.
Thank you, Teresa.
I'd like to jump in real quick, just inviting me as the staff person that supports you, and inviting you to help our transit teams who also help you. Just want to recognize that y'all have a very hard job. Y'all are each representing your own jurisdiction amidst a larger system or set of systems that serve multiple jurisdictions. And so I can appreciate, like, the question before you today is, how can y'all all work together on things that are probably going to affect or impact jurisdictions that you don't represent in some cases. And I can appreciate that that's a really hard conversation to wrestle with. And given that there's a variety of things out there, I think y'all brought up some really good pieces here: the efficiency of systems, completing a system, you know, last mile service. Some of those things are beyond your jurisdiction. Some of those things can happen even within your jurisdiction. And I think that, you know, Karen and our team can keep coming back to you with STIF opportunities or RFFA opportunities. I would also put on the table the new infrastructure bill that just passed. Yes, we're talking about 205 a lot in this group, but there are bus dollars in that bill. And that's part of that story too. So just some context of this group and what y'all run into. And I do wish TriMet was here. I probably should have reached out a couple of times, and that's on me, but they are a member of this group. But some of the challenges that y'all have had as Clackamas County when competing for these dollars is competing against, within the region, Washington County, which has large population, large employers, anchor employers, Multnomah County, large populations, grid systems, existing fundamental systems in there. And Clackamas County has struggled to have both service, ridership, and geographical struggles. And so in some cases, like needing some of that foundation to build riders so that you can show that you need more riders is part of that equation, because you're competing against Multnomah, who says we have riders and we have too many, we need more, where our buses are at capacity. That was pre-pandemic, of course, but the narrative is just different here in Clackamas County, and that's okay. But I think the opportunity here for this group is to say, where can there be alignment to build either some of that infrastructure where it doesn't exist now, find those, service systems that need to be completed. Is that something that you would like our teams to find where those are on the map? Or are there some of those little short-term things about the geographical issues that each of your jurisdictions have? Like how many of you hug rivers or hills, or how Happy Valley and the industrial area is like separated by a giant cliff. It's just a special place to live, work, and play. And I can appreciate the complexity of it. But our team is here to help you. If there is alignment on some of this stuff, give us direction. We'll come back with ideas on how to advance those. But we do need to hear more of that to keep having this conversation.
Yeah, I just want to remind folks of maybe one thing, if anyone recalls, and that's when the price of gasoline spiked many years ago. A lot of people were incentivized to take transit because it was getting expensive to drive a car. And then when the price of gasoline went way down, people said, I'll just go back to driving my car. It's cheap and it's convenient. Well, in turn, not necessarily the price of gasoline today, even though it is going up, the relationship here with a toll is going to be an added financial expense, which might incentivize people to ride if we have a system for them to do that. So I would think that would be, number one, obviously an alternative that has to be there. Frankly, I think that's something that should ODOT should invest in and the region should invest in. If we really want people to take alternatives, we should be able to provide one. So I think we have a responsibility. Yeah, that's really my point on that one. I see we have Councilor Sherman. You have your hand up, and then followed by Mayor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I mean, I always struggle a little bit with, transit can't be everything to everyone. I mean, it's, I think about my suburban residents out here that, have 2-3 kids in tow trying to go to and from school and to and from sports and making their weekly trips to Costco. And, those are not going to be very easily satisfied by transit. And so as I kind of think about, what types of things, from my city's perspective, we can coordinate on, I really do think, because we're talking about incenting many people to use transit for the first time and to kind of change long-term habits, it's got to be a really strong experience from the start. It's got to be something that when they experience it, it's convenient, it's efficient, it's quick. And so I do think that, system efficiency, frequency of service, last mile connectivity, those are the things that in my mind, at least, are the regional coordinated things that really will incent people to use the system and make it more efficient. So that's just kind of my 2 cents worth. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor. Mayor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Commissioner. So totally agree with Councilor Sherman. And I guess my next point is actually a question for the transit experts. We probably all have some of the same statistics. I just hear them from many cities where like in Wilsonville, something like 95% of the people drive or commute into work and then leave. And so they're all going to work. So with the employer, when we're looking at locating employers, trying to attract employers and also support the current employer base that we have right now so they don't get some wonderful offer and move to Utah, is there a way of focusing some of the investment, not to leave outlying areas alone or something, but it is focusing on some of those employer commutes a way to go? Because to Councilor Sherman's point, everybody can't bring their 3 kids and 2 dogs everywhere they go on the bus. But then those of us who are commuting to work, it's pretty easy. So is there a way to kind of focus on getting some wins for the commuter?
Well, I guess I should probably jump in since Mayor Fitzgerald represents Wilsonville. SMART was set up years ago, and and I'm talking pre-pandemic, pulsed with the West Train. So we had a lot of the commuters, the workers, coming into Wilsonville on the West Train, and our guarantee to those riders was we would get them anywhere in Wilsonville within 10 minutes. And we've done that successfully for a number of years. And so now ridership has waned a bit on the West Train. We're starting to see it come back a little bit. But we're going to have to reinvent ourselves. And I think transit in Multnomah County works very well. The way, the business model that they use there, it's not going to work the same way in Clackamas County. So I think we're at a tipping point, the small providers, the professionals, as some of you describe us, to come up with a better mousetrap. And I'm convinced, we talked about marketing and things like that, and that's extremely important. And we do, and I'm speaking for SMART, we have a budget for marketing. We do a lot of that. But I'm convinced if we come up with a better mousetrap, folks will show up. And I will tell you, full disclosure, back in October, I started using our service and the park and ride in Canby to and from work every day. And it works flawlessly. In the rain, in the hot sun, it doesn't matter. We have Wi-Fi on all our buses. And so it's a very comfortable ride. And so I figured, I have to practice what I preach, right? And so I'm using it, I have been using it every day to and from work since October, and will continue to use it because it works really well. And I think we have a good story to tell, all of us, the small providers, along with TriNet. And we don't do a real good job of telling our story. And so I think maybe we're at that tipping point where we do need to do a better job and a more robust job of telling our story, and then talking to some of the folks like Mr. Cook and others that have needs outside of the main corridors, and see if there's an opportunity for us to work with them. I'm convinced there are. We're smarter than we probably give ourselves credit for, and I think we can come up with a system that works well for Clackamas County. It's a Clackamas County solution that I think the small providers need to come up with. So.
And I would add one comment too, that I think transit can really be used as a promotional opportunity to attract and retain business, not just in terms of commuters, but in terms of community livability. A community that's well served by transit is a community that's meeting the needs of all of its citizens, not just commuters, and is able to provide a broad variety of services to encourage people to remain in that community, to to seek both employment in that community, to shop in that community, to live in that community. So I think again that goes back to Dwight's point of doing both making the adjustments that we need, being nimble enough to make the adjustments that we need to provide better service in areas that need service improvements, but also to do a good job of promoting ourselves, not just as a service to get your workers to your front door, but as services that promote community livability and make this an attractive place to live. And I think Clackamas County has that hugely in many, many ways. And I think we need to do a better job of telling our story around transit as a component of that.
Thank you for that, Teresa. It kind of reminded me, we have, I've described Clackamas County as a county with cities that are somewhat islands, where we have Estacada, you got Canby, got Wilsonville out there, some degree. We have some cities that are contiguous, right? Like West Lynn and Lake Oswego, Milwaukee to Portland, Milwaukee to the unincorporated area. But we have all these barriers, so we're kind of separated. And when you mentioned talking about communities, Teresa, I was thinking about connecting the communities, which is what I think a lot of our local providers like you all are doing. So thank you for that. That's really important. So I see the community thing like the Grove Link in Forest Grove, for example, with that local circulator, creating that loop there, and TriMet or other connections to people so they can get to and from, and making those connections is part of that system, right? Is part of that convenience. So kind of just makes me think about that network and where things are. We have a lot of destinations, whether they're work or they're doctor related or shopping, whatever. But I think it's if we thought in that light as well, we could probably add a little bit more value to, or imagination that is, to how to ask for or strive for a particular service. And I think it kind of gets back to convenience, connections, and again, I think your point about communities. So thank you for that. Mr. Myers, you're up.
Well, all of this leaves me a little bit in despair, I'll be honest with you. Thinking from the rural perspective, let me tell you, I'm an urbanite. Before I moved out to the country, I lived in the city all my life, and I rode mass transit. I raised my kids in Hollywood, and we were on the Max every day. So I have a strong affinity for public transportation, but everything that we're talking about today is going to work to help the urban incorporated and unincorporated areas increase their transit use. But I'm not seeing anything, I'm not hearing anything that is going to cause the rural part of the county to buy into this. It's just so hard to imagine driving down Redland Road to Oregon City, getting out of my car, getting into transit in order to go to Wilsonville or Stafford or any place else that I might be going. It's just not reasonable to think we're going to do that out here. And Karen knows this. I mean, we're talking about a transportation bus route up Redland Road. And when she came out to present it to my group, nobody was really particularly excited about it. I don't have an answer. I don't even have a point I want to make, except that it's really difficult to see how we're going to engage the other half of the, well, not even half, but the rural aspect of the county into this. And it's really difficult because I also see that we're going to be greatly impacted adversely by the tolling, because we do not have those other alternatives except to get on 205 in so many instances. So I don't know what it is. I haven't yet heard a good idea here from anybody that's going to suggest how we pull the rural people in a way that's actually going to work. We've talked about point transportation, but again, that's putting people on the roads. Anyways, that's just my 2 cents from out here in the rural areas.
Well, thanks for that, Martin. This morning I was driving into Oregon City, and as I was turning into the city, out was a CAT, the Canby Area Transit Bus, right? It's dropping, it's making a destination. There you have a rural city with a rural connection, right? Mayor Drinkwine's with us tonight. I'm sure his citizens that use TriMet wouldn't be happy if suddenly that service stopped entirely, right? Because people rely upon that link. That's a rural city. We have Sandy, and they provide a service. So I think those are there, but to your point, I can see that areas where there is nothing, you live in a desert, right? You live in one of those transit deserts. That's probably harder for you to fathom and your neighbors to fathom when you don't have that. And getting back to Teresa's point again, Canby and Estacada, those are communities. They're cities, but they're communities in a sense. And how we fill in those blanks, how we fill in those deserts, I think will make that system more viable, unless there is something en route, like a main thoroughfare where that transit line is there and it's accessible. But good point for the areas, because I think you're really speaking to as a constituent from the desert, if you will. Anyone else? Oh, Rick.
Yeah, just to kind of tag on with what Martin was talking about. I think, especially in our area where it's urban rural interface, it's right there, and we are going to be impacted. We're going to impact the area also. But I guess kind of in a different mode is who's looking at the ordinances that might have or policy as when it comes to doing something in an RRFF5 area. So if you're going to have a hub or a park and ride, how is there I'm just looking at, let's say we're going to park cars at Rolling Hills Church, just as an example. What is the legal piece, and how is that going to be? Is anybody looking at those pieces as they fit into it? Is it a use issue with the land use pieces on that too? So I just thought I'd throw that out there. It's at some point in time, that's going to, we're going to put a parking lot in here. Oh, we can't do that in our RFF5 area. So just throwing that piece out to you.
Thanks, Rick. I also see Mayor Kaiser's hand up, but I want to bring everyone's attention to the time. So we're at 8:26. So we'll keep on going a little bit. But Karen, do you want to respond, or is there any other staff person who want to respond to Rick's question?
Well, I would say that, at the time that the actual implementation is being done with the transit routes, those land use issues are discussed. So it is talked about and considered as they're doing the planning work, and as well as the actual when it becomes operational.
And thanks to that had just come up in a conversation. We said, well, we can't have, it's a conditional use permit where they can't allow that here, or if they do, they set a precedent, and then it can be used anywhere in the whole county. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Kaiser.
Yeah, I heard what Mr. Meyer said about rural and how we're going to be able to get involved. And I think the first step to getting the rural communities involved is connecting us. I mean, it's a real simple process. Malala is not connected to Estacada. Colton's not connected to any city. Malala is not connected to Woodburn. And if you think about it, and I don't know, Mayor Drinkwine, if you're connected to Sandy, if you have a direct connect that goes directly between the two of you. Woodburn's getting ready to open up one of the biggest hubs for Amazon. Canby is getting ready to open up another Amazon hub. And for us to really start looking at the rural communities, we need to be connected. And if we're not connected, then I don't think you're right. It's never going to work in our areas.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, that brings us up to the bottom of the hour. Trent, do you think we've gone far enough? You have enough information here tonight or input?
You've given us a lot to work with as a group. And so we'll touch base with the transit team in the coming week and be back to the executive committee on some proposed next steps. I think the recommendation will be that we use our February time to just have a broader discussion at C4 about the other topics that you'd like to prioritize here. Certainly there's plenty going on that may just naturally fill itself in, like developments on I-205 and tolling, and also your interest in housing topics. And so more as we know it on those things, but we'll devote some of our time here because I think this group had a keen interest on not just having those conversations, but framing those conversations with priorities like climate and how to look at those things together and how this group sets policy or works together to meet both needs at the same time. So that's some things to look forward to. But yes, for tonight, I think good discussion. It's recorded. We can go back and check on it, and we'll make the most of it and come back with some recommendations on next steps.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for all their input and staff doing a great job on answering the questions and presenting here tonight. So thank you. I see we have C4 agenda topic priorities. Is that something you need a response to tonight, Trent?
No, that's what we're going to do in February now. And so we can go to other business.
Okay. I think we kind of covered JPAC and MPAC earlier. Is there anyone who wants to give us an update on the climate action plan? Mayor Walters?
That's normally Councilor Pratt, and she's not here today.
Okay. Mayor Walters, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if we could have on our agendas in our packet updates each month on housing services and how much money's coming in, where it's going. Is it, just get an update of how that's rolling along. I know we've been doing so much transportation work, but I don't want to lose sight of that piece that's so important.
Yep, thank you for that. That has been a pretty good conversation. I'll let Councilor Lewis fill in any gaps, but I think the good news is we've been negotiating for several months. Councilor Lewis and I have been in close communication with the IGAs between the metro and the counties. The good news is I think we got a deal inked, and I believe it's going to be in front of the council here in the next week or so for signature, and then the counties will sign on. And so that will allow at least Clackamas County, I can speak for, hopefully in short order with a couple steps, we can make another ask to perhaps borrow some more money, because we're running out of money, folks. Only $906,000 is the total we have collected for Clackamas County from the supportive housing services thus far. So the entire year, $906,000. Now, there is the collection becomes mandatory in January this month. But as the employers make their payroll and all those things, we don't expect to see that money really flowing heavily until May, April, somewhere in there, June, before we see substantial revenue flow. So we'll be able to hopefully get an idea of what that is and get more out there. Councilor Lewis, anything you want to add?
No, you covered the highlight there, which is we have an IGA that we nailed on the 15th of December. So we're able to vote on it. And that's a big requirement for us to move forward. So I look forward to hearing more from the county about what they need in order to kind of bridge between now and April, May, when the big bucks really hit because of these two forms of taxes.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Trent, let's try and get an update on that listed on the agenda so that it's something that we see on there and that we can all recognize, whether it's myself or Mayor Hodson can see as co-chair, or yourself, we can get that update. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Mayor Walters, for your contribution on that. Any other business?
Yes, I have 3 things. We'll see if I can go through them quickly. Number 1, and I've already said it, is just a reminder that the OTC will be talking about how to use those federal dollars on January 20th. So a reminder, if you're interested in testifying or submitting something or just verbal, showing up and actually speaking there, please, I'll let either Commissioner Savas or me or Jamie Stasny, whoever you have a relationship, let us know, and we'll help you, we'll work you all into the strategy that's kind of being developed on that, because I think it's all near and dear to each of us on that being a successful conversation. Number 2, each of y'all are probably having conversations in your own jurisdictions about how you will spend your American Rescue Plan Act dollars, Recovery Act, Rescue Plan Act. Today, the final guidance from the Treasury released, and so that's been much anticipated. That doesn't go into effect until April the 1st, and so you still got some time to spend the dollars under the interim guidance, and the Treasury has said that if you are allocating your dollars under the interim guidance, that is fine until the new guidance is in effect. And so if you're probably not doing it wrong, double check though. The new guidance, the final guidance, is like 200 pages more than the interim guidance. So get your reading glasses on, talk to your friends, have a nice, party and book club about it. But that just came out today. Look to League of Cities, look to NACO on some of the resources that will be available to each of you in your own in your own roles there, for how to engage those dollars and apply them to the decisions that you're making in your jurisdictions. And then I had a third topic, but I forgot it and it's late. That's all I got.
That happens. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Seeing none. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. Have a safe drive home, and we'll see you next time. We're adjourned.